Hey, how are you doing? Welcome to another episode of Dad Deleted. And I just wanted to talk to you today about a paradigm shift, maybe a different way of thinking about how to deal with your individual situation with parental alienation. I can tell you that for me and for our family, what we did, I think looking back on it, was wrong, backwards. Even though we did have success legally, I think we would all agree that that's not success. As a matter of fact, one of my attorneys, this was right after I got almost complete physical custody of the kids, we walked out of the courtroom and he said, "You should be happy. You won. We had victory." And I said, "No," I said, that's where you and I are thinking differently about this. I said, victory for me is not physical custody. It's not about removing one parent or the other. It's not about me having primary parental control or anything like that. Victory for me, and I think this would be true for 100% of any parents out there who are not alienators, but the only victory for me is to have a loving, normal, healthy relationship with my kids. That's victory. And that's whether or not I have every other weekend and 42 days in the summer, or if it's 50-50 shared custody, or if it's I have primary custody and the lion's share of physical custody. None of those things have anything to do with having a healthy and loving relationship with the kids. And that's what you want. And quite honestly, that's the only reason that I fought for more custody in the first place, was because even when I had just every other weekend and 42 days in the summer and we split the holidays, I was being alienated from my children then. And quite honestly, as much as I wanted 50-50 custody and as much as I wanted more time with my kids, I doubt very seriously that I would have fought and spent the money that we did to get more custody if I didn't feel like that was my only choice and my only chance to have a relationship with my kids at all. And most attorneys will tell you it's very difficult to change custody. Which, by the way, is an even stronger reason why we need 50-50 custody to be the standard custody decision. That should be the default, unless you can prove that there is a serious reason why one parent should not have equal shared custody. But back to the original point of this video today, and hopefully this will be a little shorter than normal. But Dr. C.A. Childress out of California is a preeminent expert, and he is a driving force in really a lot of the new ways to look at parental alienation and how to deal with it and how to cope with it. And one of the things he just recently said, and I'll try and put this up when we put it on YouTube. He said, "Why are you trying to prove this pathology?" And what he really, I think, what he might as well be saying to the vast majority of us is, why are you trying to prove parental alienation to a judge? Why don't you get a therapist, a psychologist, to call out a DSM-5 diagnosis, Why don't you get someone to identify that DSM-5 diagnosis, right? And then take that to a judge. Because in reality, if you get that, what you're going to have, if you have a parent who is alienating a child, that is child abuse. And you can prove that without calling it parental alienation. And I think we all know that's a problematic term to begin with, because it goes back to Dr. Richard Gartner and his work in the 70s and the 80s, and how he called it PAS, parental alienation syndrome. And quite honestly, parental alienation, even though we all know that this is every bit as true as anything else out there. And for example, PTSD, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder, wasn't officially recognized, I don't believe, until 1980 or the early 80s. But that didn't mean that PTSD didn't exist before then. They just didn't have a nice little container for it. They didn't have a nice little name for it. But people had PTSD going back forever, and I guarantee you, even for sure, World War II, they called it shell shock. People have PTSD. So anytime you have serious traumatic situations like that, they don't oftentimes get through it unscathed, and so they deal with this, they have their brains and their psychology. They deal with it in some ways that are jumbled, right? And so again, not to get hung up on that, but parental alienation, it's a lot of different moving parts. There's family dynamics that are involved. There is narcissistic personality disorders that are involved. There are borderline personality disorders that are involved. You have weak parenting styles that are involved. There's all sorts of parts to this that create parental alienation. And then you have this shared delusion, right, where the kids think that they believe it, that whatever the horrible things are true, or whatever, mommy doesn't love us or daddy doesn't love us, all that kind of stuff. And they parrot this information back that was told to them by the alienating parent. Okay, so there's a lot of moving parts, and parental alienation is not as yet officially defined in the DSM-5. And until that happens, focus on what can be diagnosed in the DSM-5. And so for that information, I'm gonna lead you back to Dr. Childress to discuss. He also will do consultations, professional to professional consultations. He has letters, he has memos, emails, information that you can share with a therapist, but that is critical that you find a therapist who is willing to deal with the family dynamics. That is critical. And again, I would refer you back to Dr. Childress's work. I will refer you to his website. I'll put that down here below, and then go and research that information for yourself. All I'm telling you is don't spend tens of thousands, and in my case, hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to fight for something when the judge is not capable of understanding what you're dealing with. Again, judges are trained in the law. They're not trained in psychology, and they are certainly not trained in these subsets of psychology. They're not trained in narcissistic personality disorder behaviors. They don't necessarily know what to look for. And by the way, remember, narcissistic personalities and borderline personalities are excellent at masking behavior. Very often they mirror behavior, right? So if the judge is polite to them, they're polite to the judge. And unless you have some really hardcore evidence, and even then, if your attorney doesn't use the evidence properly, then it's a waste. You're wasting money. Get a diagnosis first, and then take that to a judge and try and get an emergency order, or try and just get a hearing. And hopefully you will have some other documentation, you'll have other evidence to support that. But remember, at the same time, the most powerful evidence is a therapist, a psychologist who's saying, look, this is child abuse. Now, what would you do if this parent was abusing their child physically or sexually, right? You'd get them out of that situation. You would remove them from that home. In my mind, there's no difference. This is serious psychological, emotional, mental child abuse. So, again, get psychological support first. Get a diagnosis first and take that to a judge. And don't put the judge in the position of having to determine whether or not something rises to the level of removing a child or making at least even an initial change, a short-term change, or an interim change. And so, again, I'll direct you to Dr. Childress's website, and I would strongly recommend that you go and read his work and read his suggestions. And again, he has materials that you can provide to your attorney. He has materials that you can provide to your therapist. But I would take his suggestion. I wish that I had read that. I wish I had understood that 6 years ago, 5 years ago. I would have taken a different tact. And I firmly believe that it would have made things clearer to the judge. So anyway, thank you. Enjoy your weekend, and remember, as always, love your kids.